Fog coils low over the crumbling remnants of Holloway Manor, skeletal pillars jutting from the overgrowth like decaying bones. Brick walls blackened by time, their surfaces cracked and eroded by decades of storms and silence. The ruins loom, like a phantom in the Louisiana swamps, veiled in mist that never seems to lift. Faded black and white photographs flicker across the screen, stern-faced men in tailored suits, women in lace and pearls, their eyes glassy, smiles brittle. A family portrait dissolves into images of weathered missing posters, the edges curled, the faces faded, the words, "Have you seen me?" barely legible. Children vanished, heirs buried before their time. Bloodlines snapped like brittle twigs. The Holloways were once a name, synonymous with Southern aristocracy, wealthy beyond reason, entrenched in politics. Their empire built on sugarcane and secrecy. But behind the grandeur, the whispers festered. Servants spoke of strange midnight gatherings in the manor's west wing. Locals warned of symbols, cryptic, carved deep into the walls and hidden beneath peeling wallpaper, symbols tied to ancient rites, to something far older than the plantation itself. Over the decades, the tragedies piled up like storm debris, disappearances, drownings, entire wings of the estate burned under suspicious circumstances, each incident dismissed, each warning buried, until the Holloway family itself seemed to wither under the weight of its own legend. But some say the curse never ended, that even now, the blood-soaked legacy coils through the swamps, lingering in the Spanish moss, etched into the decaying ruins, festering like an open wound. The Holloway name has faded from society's lips, but in the forgotten corners of Louisiana, the shadows still speak, and those who listen, they hear the whispers of madness, of ritual, of a mystery that refuses to die. The camera drifts over the endless stretch of Louisiana bayou waters, dark as ink, choked with tangled reeds and ancient cypress trees whose roots writhe above the surface like skeletal fingers clawing at the sky. Spanish moss hangs in heavy curtains, swaying with the humidity, draping the landscape in a shroud of decay and forgotten time. This is Belmorne Parish, a place untouched by progress, where the air hums with the weight of stories best left untold. Roads here twist like veins through marshland, leading to isolated fishing villages, crumbling plantations, and churches weathered by centuries of storms. Locals speak in hushed tones, carrying with them generations of superstition warnings, stitched into every whispered legend. It was here, nestled along the murky banks of the Perdition River, that the Holloway family built their kingdom. In the early 1800s, they arrived with ambition and deep pockets, turning acres of raw swamp into thriving sugarcane fields. Holloway Manor rose like a monument to their power. Sprawling columns, wrought-iron balconies, marble floors imported from Europe. To outsiders, they were aristocrats, refined, philanthropic pillars of Southern wealth. But to those who lived in Belmorne, the Holloways were something else entirely. Beneath the manicured gardens and grand galas, the land beneath their empire was saturated with rumors, strange symbols hidden beneath floorboards, cryptic rituals whispered about by generations of house staff, unexplained disappearances buried under legal settlements and silence. The deeper you look into the Holloway legacy, the more tangled the history becomes, roots twisting with madness, betrayal and blood. Today, the once grand manor stands in ruins, its walls crumbling, vines strangling the wrought iron, the windows long shattered by hurricanes and time. But the locals still avoid the estate, steering clear of the property lines as if something unseen lingers in the air, festering in the shadows. Because here in Belmorn Parish, the past never stays buried, and the Holloway name, it still stains the soil. Faded sepia portraits fade into view, stern faces frozen in time, eyes heavy with secrets. The first belongs to Magnus Holloway, born in 1812, the enigmatic patriarch who carved the Holloway dynasty into the swamps of Belmorn Parish. Tall, gaunt, his expression unreadable beneath the sharp lines of his aristocratic features, Magnus arrived in Louisiana from Charleston with wealth, ambition, and whispers trailing behind him. Documents from the era paint him as a cunning businessman, acquiring land and political influence with unnerving ease. But buried within old letters and obscure records lie hints of darker affiliations, rumored ties to secret societies, cryptic symbols etched into the margins of his personal ledgers. Unexplained transactions linked to esoteric groups operating quietly in the shadows of New Orleans. Elite, by his side, stood Eliza Holloway, born 1820, delicate, poised, the portrait of Southern grace. But her story is far from the genteel image that survives in brittle photographs. Eliza vanished in 1890, her disappearance never solved, her body never recovered. Some claimed she drowned in the Perdition River. Others whispered of something far stranger, that she became the first true victim of the Holloway curse. Her absence ignited decades of speculation, fueling the family's descent into scandal and tragedy over the generations. The Holloway bloodline unraveled like frayed silk. Their descendants, heirs to fortune and farmland, found themselves plagued by an unsettling pattern. Sudden deaths ruled as accidents, disappearances brushed off by authorities, mental breakdowns whispered about behind closed doors. Newspaper clippings from the early 1900s chronicle the family's gradual fall from grace, boating accidents, house fires, heirs institutionalized for what was politely labeled nervous afflictions. To outsiders, coincidence. But to those living in Belmorn, the Holloway legacy bore the unmistakable fingerprints of something far more sinister. A generational curse steeped in secrecy and blood. In the present day, one man remains obsessed with uncovering the truth. Detective Charles Renard, retired, weathered by decades in law enforcement, his eyes still sharp beneath the lines of exhaustion, has dedicated his twilight years to unraveling the Holloway enigma. His walls are plastered with photographs, hand-drawn maps of the estate, transcripts of forgotten testimonies. To some, Renard is a conspiracy theorist lost to obsession. But others see him as the last thread of sanity tugging at a tapestry of buried horrors. Joining him are local historians and lifelong residents, guardians of folklore, reluctant witnesses to the Holloway family's dark legacy. They sift through brittle court records, faded journals, oral traditions passed down like warnings. Piece by piece, they unearth fragments of a forgotten history, symbols etched into stone, cryptic diary entries, vanishing heirs whose fates were never fully explained. Together, they chase shadows through the ruins of Holloway Manor, determined to expose what lies beneath the crumbling facade. Even if the truth proves more unsettling than legend ever dared to suggest. It began, as these stories often do, with whispers. Long before the Holloway name curdled into infamy, servants and field hands spoke in hushed tones about strange happenings on the estate, flickering lights seen through the upper windows long after midnight, when the house was supposed to be empty. Some claimed the grand ballroom, abandoned to dust and cobwebs, glowed faintly at night, as though lanterns burned behind the cracked glass, casting silhouettes that moved when no one was there. Others spoke of hearing the faint echo of children's laughter drifting from the halls, high gleeful, but laced with something off-kilter, something wrong. Locals living along the Perdition River told of mutilated livestock discovered along the property lines, goats and cattle gutted with surgical precision, organs removed, their bodies arranged in eerie, deliberate patterns across the fields. But the true descent into infamy began in 1874, when young Thomas Holloway, heir to the estate, only 10 years old, vanished without a trace. The boy had been seen playing near the edge of the swamp just before sundown, his nanny turning away for only a moment. When she looked back, Thomas was gone. Search parties scoured the property for weeks, combing through the cane fields, dredging the riverbanks, tearing through the manor's sprawling grounds, but there was nothing, no footprints, no belongings, no body. His disappearance sent ripples of fear through Belmore and Parish. The Holloway name, already laced with suspicion, became a lightning rod for rumor. In the years that followed, strange occurrences began to stack like brittle bones. In 1876, Magnus Holloway himself was found dead in his study, his throat torn open, the scene devoid of blood. Official reports called it an accident, though the details never quite aligned. His death marked the beginning of a grim tradition. Each generation of Holloways plagued by unexplained tragedy, fires devouring entire wings of the manor in the dead of night, heirs found drowned in shallow water, family portraits discovered defaced, symbols scrawled in unfamiliar script across the faces. Witnesses outside the Holloway bloodline reported unnerving sightings. Farmhands recalled hearing chanting echo from the manor grounds during stormy nights, low, rhythmic, and distinctly inhuman. Others stumbled upon symbols carved into the bark of cypress trees surrounding the estate, runes older than the plantation itself, tied to occult traditions with roots reaching across continents. In 1902, Mary Holloway, great-granddaughter of Magnus, was institutionalized after being found wandering barefoot along the Perdition River, clothes soaked in mud, her eyes vacant. Her journal, later recovered by investigators, detailed recurring nightmares of the glowing children and the drowned man. Cryptic phrases dismissed by doctors as hysteria, but eerily consistent with long-standing local legends. As the decades turned, the pattern not only repeated, it escalated. Disappearances became more frequent, deaths more grotesque. Entire sections of the Holloway estate fell into ruin, abandoned by the surviving family members who fled to New Orleans or further north. Yet, despite the decay, neighbors reported seeing faint lights flicker in the manor's windows even after it had been empty for years. Some claimed the air around the estate carried a peculiar heaviness, the scent of sulfur, the chill of unseen eyes watching from the tree line. By the 1950s, the Holloway estate had devolved into a local cautionary tale, the kind of place teenagers dared each other to approach on moonless nights. Those who ventured too close returned shaken. Speaking of distant music drifting through the swamp, whispers in the wind, the faint cry of a child echoing across the abandoned grounds. Livestock mutilations resurfaced, symbols carved anew into the soil and trees, their patterns eerily consistent with the ones documented nearly a century prior. Throughout it all, one constant endured: silence from the remaining Holloway descendants. Publicly, they dismissed the rumors, attributing tragedies to coincidence accidents, or mental illness. A convenient explanation for the broken lineage and shattered reputations. But those rooted in Belmorn Parish knew better. The pattern was undeniable. The curse, or whatever force, clung to the Holloway name, persisted, evolving, deepening, resisting every attempt to explain it away. And in the shadows of the rotting manor, beneath the peeling wallpaper, behind the splintered doors, etched into the very bones of the house, the symbols remained, waiting. For decades, the people of Belmoyne Parish had perfected the art of selective ignorance. Life in the swamps was hard enough without courting the shadows that clung to the Holloway name. Most residents learned to look the other way, to steer their fishing boats wide of the estate's flooded borders, to quicken their pace when passing the crumbling gates on fog-heavy mornings. The whispers were always there, trickling through church gatherings, lingering in the corners, of smoky bars stitched into the lullabies passed from mother to child. Some spoke of the Holloways dabbling in occult practices, strange rites held beneath moonlit cypress trees, symbols older than Christianity carved into the foundations of Holloway Manor. Others insisted it was nothing more than a family succumbing to madness, generation after generation, cracking beneath the weight of their own decay. But everything changed in the spring of 1952, with what locals now grimly refer to as the Bayou Incident. The Holloway family had been dwindling for years, their numbers thinning as tragedy and scandal consumed them. But three cousins, Jacob, Ruth, and Ellis Holloway, remained on the ancestral land, defiant in their isolation. Despite their the cousins were known to make rare appearances in Belmorn, stoic, pale, unnerving presences at town meetings or supply runs. Some described them as distant, others as quietly unhinged, their eyes haunted by private terrors no one dared pry into. On the night of April 3rd, 1952, a vicious storm rolled across the bayou, lightning splitting the sky, floodwaters swelling the Perdition River beyond its banks. By morning, the Holloway estate was silent. Neighbors, reluctant but concerned, approached the manor. What they found deepened the fractures of fear that had long rippled through the parish. The mansion's front door hung open, swaying in the wind. Inside, the grand halls were deserted. No sign of Jacob, Ruth, or Ellis. Their belongings remained untouched, dishes still set on the dining table, oil lamps burning low, clothing neatly folded on the beds. But of the cousins themselves, there was nothing. No footprints, no signs of struggles, just a single grotesque symbol scrawled in crimson across the parlor wall. To those familiar with the estate's dark folklore, the design was chillingly familiar, circular pattern flanked by jagged lines, nearly identical to markings seen etched into the trees for generations. The news spread through Belmorn like wildfire. At first, law enforcement treated it as a missing persons case. Deputies combed the swamp for days, aided by state authorities, but the dense terrain yielded no answers. The Holloway cousins had vanished as if swallowed by the land itself. Number. Bodies, no evidence, only deepening silence. The Bayou Incident shattered what little normalcy remained. Fear gave way to dread, and the uneasy tolerance of the Holloways curdled into outright suspicion. Old-timers warned that the family had finally succumbed to the curse that stalked their bloodline. Younger residents whispered of rituals gone wrong, of spirits rising from the marsh to claim their due. Churches filled overnight as families prayed for protection, desperate to ward off whatever darkness had taken root along the Perdition River. The Holloway Manor, already decaying, was abandoned completely, left to rot in the humidity and creeping vines. Over time, the estate became a forbidden zone. Children dared each other to approach its crumbling steps. Fishermen refused to cast their lines near its overgrown borders. Local media seized on the hysteria. Grainy black and white footage from the time shows reporters in trench coats standing before the manor's sagging facade, their voices brittle with unease as they recount the family's legacy of tragedy. Headlines splashed across regional newspapers screamed *Holloway heirs vanish without a trace. Fueling wild speculation that painted the estate as cursed, haunted, or worse. The national press lost interest after a few weeks, but for Belmorne Parish, the wound remained raw as months bled into years. The legend of the Holloway curse hardened into a chilling part of the parish's identity. Parents warned their children to stay away from the estate, to steer clear of the swamp after dark. Hunters spoke of strange sounds emanating from the ruins, echoes of faint laughter, the mournful strains of music drifting through the fog, unnatural shadows shifting just beyond the tree line. The symbols, the same ones carved into wood, stone, and flesh over generations, began appearing again, freshly etched into the trunks of cypress trees near the riverbanks, unnervingly precise, as if drawn by unseen hands. For some, the Holloways, collapse was poetic, just as a wealthy, arrogant family finally undone by their own darkness. Others felt only pity, regarding the manor and its haunted grounds as a tragic monument to mental illness and generational trauma. But beneath those rational explanations, an older, more primal fear took hold. In hushed conversations behind church pews and in the dim corners of local bars, residents admitted what few dared say publicly: the Holloway curse was real, and it wasn't finished. The older generation passed down fragmented stories like heirlooms, tales of the glowing children, of midnight rituals, of faces seen in windows where no living soul remained. To the outside world, it was just superstition, small town's attempt to rationalize decades of misfortune. But in Belmorne Parish, where the Spanish moss hangs heavy and the swamps conceal secrets older than the plantation itself, the line between folklore and reality has always been perilously thin. And with each new storm that rolls across the bayou, with every flicker of light seen from the manor's skeletal remains, the people of Belmorne are reminded that some legacies refuse to stay buried. The Holloway name may have faded from legal records, but its presence lingers in the whispers of locals, in the twisted roots beneath the swamp, and in the cold, heavy dread that grips the parish every time the fog rolls in. In the summer of 1987, the legend of the Holloway curse crossed a line it could never retreat from. What had, for decades, been relegated to whispers, superstition, and unresolved disappearances suddenly manifested into something tangible, something the authorities could no longer ignore. It was the discovery of Sarah Holloway, the last known descendant who dared to return to the decaying estate. Sarah was distant kin, a Holloway by blood, but raised far from Belmorne Parish, her life unfolding in Baton Rouge, removed from the shadowed histories that clung to the family name. Some say she came searching for answers, driven by curiosity, or perhaps an unspoken pull toward her ancestral home. Others believed she returned because the curse demanded it that no Holloway, no matter how distant, could truly escape. What is certain is this: Sarah arrived alone. Over the course of several months, neighbors occasionally spotted her moving through the overgrown grounds, sometimes seen sitting quietly on the manor's sagging porch, as if listening for something. She visited the local archives, questioned aging residents, scoured old parish records. Whatever she was searching for in those crumbling walls, she never told anyone. Then, in early September, she vanished when Sarah missed a scheduled appointment. In Baton Rouge, her friends raised the alarm. Sheriff's deputies from Belmorne launched a search, though privately they dreaded setting foot on Holloway soil. What they found inside the manor would cement the family's story as something far more disturbing than faded folklore. Sarah's body was discovered beneath the manor's long-forgotten chapel, a derelict structure partially collapsed, buried in vines and rot. The search party followed the faint scent of decay through the sagging corridors, descending into the damp stone cellar that lay beneath the chapel's cracked foundation. There, in the center of the cold stone floor, Sarah lay posed with ritualistic precision. Her arms were extended outward, palms up, her eyes eerily open, staring blankly into the darkness above. Around her, etched meticulously into the floor, was a sprawling cymbalan, ancient, circular design interwoven with jagged runes. It was identical to the markings that had haunted the Holloway estate for generations. Sarah's body showed no immediate signs of trauma, no bruising, no defensive wounds, no clear cause of death. The coroner's report would later list her manner of death as inconclusive. Toxicology revealed nothing, no trace of poison, no evidence of suffocation. It was as though her life had simply been extinguished, absent of struggle or explanation. Authorities searched the chapel's remains thoroughly, finding no signs of forced entry or anyone else present. Yet something about the scene chilled even the most hardened debateezer quiet, inescapable sense that Sarah had not been alone in those final moments. The sheriff's department tried to handle the case by the book, but in Belmorne, the discovery tore open old wounds. To the townsfolk, Sarah's death was no accident. It was a confirmation, irrefutable proof that the Holloway curse was not just whispered legend, but a malignant force, alive and still hungry. The talk in town shifted from speculation to certainty. The chapel became a place few dared to speak of, let alone approach, and the man already avoided became a forbidden ground entirely. Sheriff's reports from the time capture, the palpable unease surrounding the investigation. Deputies complained of malfunctioning equipment, radios crackling with static when nearing the estate, compasses spinning uselessly. One search team member later confided that while navigating the manor's upper floors, he heard what sounded unmistakably like a child's laughter, echoing faintly down the corridor. When he turned, the hallway behind him was empty. Newspaper headlines briefly reignited regional interest. Asterisk, mysterious death revives Holloway curse. Television crews descended on Belmorne, their reports tinged with both skepticism and fear. Some experts interviewed on national broadcasts attributed Sarah's death to psychological breakdown, a woman seduced by family myths, perhaps even complicit in her own death through a form of psychogenic fugue. Others refused to offer any explanation, unsettled by the case's eerie details and the long, bloodied trail that preceded it. Detective Charles Renard, though retired by that point, was drawn back into the Holloway web. He had followed the family's story for decades, piecing together its grim tapestry, and Sarah's death crystallized what he had long suspected, that the pattern was no longer a coincidence. He meticulously documented the scene, cross-referencing the symbol encircling Sarah's body with earlier carvings found throughout the estate and in the surrounding swamps. His notes, private journals, and tap-recorded musings revealed a man teetering between methodical investigation and obsessive belief. Renard became convinced that the Holloway estate itself was a kind of vessel anchor for something ancient, perhaps something deliberately summoned. Sarah's death marked the first incident in decades where the horror could no longer be dismissed as distant family tragedy or unverified folklore. It was a turning point that cracked the parish's carefully maintained distance wide open. Belmore's residents no longer simply avoided the manor, they feared what might now be awake within it. Those who still lived nearby began to report increased disturbances, guttural chanting rising from the bayou at night, sightings of flickering lantern lights in the upper windows, symbols reappearing freshly carved along the paths that led to the chapel's ruins. The Holloway story, once relegated to ghost stories and whispered warnings, had clawed its way violently into the present. And as the autumn storms rolled over the swamp that year, the people of Belmore Parish came to a grim realization. The Holloway curse was not a relic of the past. It was active, it was watching, and it was far from finished to truly grasp the darkness woven through the Holloway legacy. One must first understand the landscape that birthed at a place where history and myth have always been hopelessly entangled. 19th century Louisiana was a land shaped by contradictions, vast wealth and staggering poverty, refinement and brutality, civilization built on the back of exploitation. French aristocrats and European merchants arrived in droves, carving grand estates out of the swamplands, bringing with them their customs, their fortunes, their secrets. In Belmore Parish, like much of southern Louisiana, the old world never fully died. The region was a melting pot of French colonial influence, Caribbean mysticism, African traditions, and deep-seated superstition. Alongside the grand plantations and lavish masquerade balls lurked something older, more primal, network of whispered rituals, secret societies, and esoteric knowledge passed quietly from generation to generation. It was in this environment that families like the Holloways thrived, leveraging wealth and bloodlines to embed themselves among Louisiana's elite, while cultivating reputations that behind closed doors were steeped in shadow. The archives from the era revealed tantalizing fragments of this hidden world. Records detail social clubs and exclusive fraternal orders, many publicly devoted to philanthropy or business, but rumored to harbor more clandestine pursuits beneath the surface. Names like La Société du Cercle Rouge and Les Valeurs Diminuées appear frequently. In the margins of personal letters and estate ledgers, their insignias eerily reminiscent of symbols still found carved into decaying wood and stone on Holloway property today. Louisiana folklore has always blurred the line between the real and the supernatural. Tales of cursed bloodlines, spectral apparitions, and deals struck with forces beyond comprehension have circulated for centuries. Rooted in both European occultism and African diasporic spiritual traditions, the region's beliefs created fertile ground for a legacy like the Holloways to fester unchecked. Hoodoo, rootwork, Catholicism, and whispers of darker, more arcane rites coexisted, bleeding into the rituals and superstitions that shaped daily life. Plantation families, with their immense wealth and isolation, became natural incubators for secrecy. The Holloways, having risen to power during the height of Louisiana's sugar empire, possessed both the means and the arrogance to believe they were untouchable. But beneath the gilded facade of Holloway Manor, the cultural and historical currents of the region seeped into the walls. The strange carvings found hidden behind wallpaper, the cryptic ledgers encoded with unfamiliar sigils, the whispers of midnight gatherings beneath the cypress canopage. piece points to a legacy deeply intertwined with the occult fabric of Louisiana's past by the time Magnus Holloway laid the first stones of the family estate. Belmorne was already a place heavy with ghost stories and whispered warnings. The disappearance of his wife, Eliza, the tragic fate of their descendants, the increasingly ritualistic nature of the tragedies surrounding the family. It all echoes back to a cultural landscape saturated with hidden rites, forgotten languages, and the persistent belief that some doors, once opened, never truly closed. To understand the Holloway mystery is to confront Louisiana's most unsettling truth. Here, the veil between folklore and reality has always been paper-thin and, sometimes, it tears completely. For decades, as the Holloway mystery festered beneath the surface of Belmorne Parish, theories circulated like wildfire. They trickled through backroom bars, echoed in church basements, and filled the pages of yellowing newspapers that could never quite let the story die. Some were rooted in rationality-comfortable explanations wrapped in clinical language. Others drifted into the impossible. Yet each time tragedy struck the Holloway bloodline, even the most skeptical found themselves questioning where reality ended and something far darker began. Detective Charles Renard's files became the epicenter of the investigation. His office, tucked away in a modest home along the outskirts of town, resembled less a detective's workspace and more the lair of a conspiracy theorist unraveling decades of unsolved puzzles. Stacks of old news clippings were pinned to photographs of the manor over the years lined the walls, and chalkboard timelines stretched from the 1800s to the present, connecting dots that few dared examine. Renard had been with the parish sheriff's department for most of his career, but even in retirement, his obsession with the Holloways only deepened. The first, and most widely accepted theory, pointed to generational mental illness. Even in the family's early days, accounts of Holloway descendants suffering from nervous afflictions and episodes of melancholia peppered the historical record. Several were institutionalized, others quietly disappeared from public life. Medical experts cited the high occurrence of depression, schizophrenia, and inherited psychological disorders. To skeptics, this theory explained the disappearances, the erratic behavior, and even the whispered sightings of strange figures around the Esteta family imploding under the weight of its own corrupted bloodline. But even those who clung to this explanation struggled to reconcile the eerie consistency of the events, the symbols etched into walls across generations, the repeated pattern of ritualistic elements surrounding each tragedy, the precise and deliberate nature of the coincidences. For others, the Holloway enigma could only be understood through the lens of occult involvement. Historical records, when examined closely, revealed unsettling connections. Magnus Holloway, the patriarch, was linked to obscure societies operating in New Orleans and abroad groups with ties to esoteric practices, ritual ceremonies, and forbidden knowledge tracing back to European secret orders. Renard's research uncovered ledgers from the Holloway archives marked with cryptic sigils, nearly identical to symbols found carved into trees and stone around the manor in modern times. Stories emerged of hidden chambers beneath the estate, gatherings beneath moonless skies, and artifacts of unknown origin locked away within the mansion's walls. Those who believed the Holloways were practitioners of the occult argue that their wealth and influence shielded them from scrutiny, allowing generations to continue rituals that blurred the boundary between tradition and something more sinister. Then came the theory of elaborate cover-ups by the elite notions steeped in Southern Gothic intrigue, but one difficult to dismiss outright. The Holloways, like many plantation families of their era, wielded considerable power. They moved in circles of judges, politicians, and businessmen whose influence could bend public perception and bury uncomfortable truths. It wasn't lost on investigators like Renard that countless tragedies surrounding the Holloway estate were quickly labeled accidents or misfortunes, often with minimal investigation. Missing person cases vanished into administrative dead ends, suspicious deaths glossed over with vague coroner reports. To proponents of this theory, the Holloway curse was less supernatural and more systemic, an intricate web of privilege, manipulation, and secrets protected at the highest levels. But this explanation, while plausible in part, failed to address the most unsettling details: the mutilations, the ancient symbols, the impossible vanishings that no amount of political influence could fabricate. And then there was the theory. No one wanted to voice publicly, yet it persisted in whispers, growing bolder with each new incident: the supernatural. The Holloway curse, as many came to call it, wasn't metaphorical, it was real, tangible, and malicious. Locals spoke of the manor itself as a festering wound in the land, a place where the laws of nature bent and shadows moved of their own accord. Old legends resurfaced of spirits bound to the estate, of forgotten deities worshipped beneath the cypress trees, of the glowing children seen along the Perdition River's foggy banks. Sarah Holloway's ritualistic death in 1987 reignited these fears. Her body positioned with unnerving precision within the old chapel, encircled by symbols traced back to pre-colonial occult traditions. Paranormal investigators, fringe historians, and self-proclaimed experts descended upon Belmoran in waves following Sarah's death, each presenting their own outlandish interpretations. Some argued the estate sat atop a convergence of ley lines, mystical currents of energy that heightened spiritual activity. Others suggested that generations of ritual practices had awakened something beneath the soil, a presence or entity, bound to the Holloway bloodline, feeding on fear, tragedy, and sacrifice. Photographs captured faint, inexplicable orbs near the ruins. Audio recordings yielded whispers when played back in isolated rooms. Yet, for every theory, be it mental illness, occult worship, elite conspiracy, or supernatural force, one truth remained undeniable: the Holloway mystery defied resolution. Every explanation unraveled under scrutiny, tangled in contradictions and unanswered questions. Detective Renard, hardened by years of service, found himself chasing leads that looped in on themselves, like serpents devouring their own tails. His files were filled with accounts that seemed absurdient. They came from credible witnesses, townsfolk with no reason to invent stories. In the end, the Holloway mystery endured, resistant to logic or closure. Theories continued to rational, others impossible to ignore. The manor decayed, the swamps reclaimed its edges, yet the symbols persisted. New carvings appeared with chilling regularity. Lights flickered in abandoned windows. Whispers drifted through the moss-laden trees. And for those in Belmorn Parish, one unsettling certainty settled over time, regardless of which theory. One believed the Holloway curse was far from finished, and the worst, perhaps, was still to come. The Holloway legacy has never been a simple thread to follow. It's a tangled web of conflicting reports, half-truths, and a fog of misinformation that stretches back nearly 2 centuries. Every time tragedy struck the family, the same question echoed through Belmorn Parish: was this madness festering within the bloodline, or something far worse? Something deliberately concealed by those with too much to lose. Over the years, the lines between fact, folklore, and fabrication have blurred beyond recognition. The media has only fueled the confusion. Tabloid headlines from the 1950s screamed of swamp cult sacrifices at Holloway estate, an asterisk curse claims another heir. Sensationalized stories painted the Holloways as deranged aristocrats dabbling in black magic, their estate portrayed as a breeding ground for ritualistic horrors. But just beneath those lurid covers, more reputable newspapers published carefully sanitized versions of events, disappearances labeled accidents, deaths explained away by mental breakdowns, the family's reputation shielded by old money and influence, even when evidence seemed undeniable. Mutilated livestock, strange symbols, eerie witness accounts. The official narrative leaned heavily on skepticism and restraint. Witness statements only deepened the uncertainty. Those who worked the estate, descendants of farmhands and house staff, told eerily consistent stories of hearing faint chanting drifting through the cane fields at night, of seeing flickering lights from the manor long after it was abandoned, of whispers in the trees that spoke their names. Yet, just as many residents scoffed at these tales, dismissing them as the product of small-town superstition fueled by too much bourbon and not enough daylight. The case of Sarah Holloway in 1987 encapsulated this cycle perfectly. Initial reports hinted at foul play. A woman found posed beneath the chapel ruins, surrounded by symbols older than the plantation itself. Local newspapers speculated about cults, secret rituals, even paranormal interference. Yet, within weeks, the story was sanitized. Sarah's death was ruled inconclusive, her mental state questioned. Her fascination with her family's dark history used to paint her as unstable. Evidence quietly disappeared. Coroner's notes conflicted with police reports. Officials avoided interviews. Meanwhile, tabloid outlets filled the void with lurid speculation, declaring the Holloway curse active once more. Even among investigators, the accounts fractured. Detective Charles Renard's private notes revealed a man drowning in testimonies tainted by folklore, physical evidence undermined by decades of lost records and institutional apathy. Renard collected photographs of the symbols, diagrams of the estate, transcripts from shell-shocked witnesses, yet every time he drew near a conclusion, new reports surfaced that splintered the narrative further. Locals recanted their statements. Others exaggerated for attention. Historical records vanished from parish archives without explanation. Adding to the fog was the region's cultural undercurrent of secrecy. In Belmorne, distrust of outsiders runs deep, and the Holloways were both revered and reviled. Some families benefited from their wealth. Others buried their grievances beneath generations of silence. The result was an oral history riddled with contradictions. Some spoke of kindness and charity from the Holloways. Others swore they were cursed by ancient forces, their estate a breeding ground for the unnatural. Modern-day coverage hasn't helped. Fragmented news clips show interviews with self-proclaimed experts, each pushing competing narratives. Paranormal investigators frame the Holloways as victims of malevolent spirits. Psychologists cite mass hysteria and generational trauma. Conspiracy theorists tie the family to underground cabals stretching from New Orleans to Europe. Online forums are littered with grainy photos of symbols, alleged recordings of ghostly voices, and exaggerated retellings that transform each incident into something monstrous. Truth and fiction swirl together, inseparable, and beneath it all remains the unsettling possibility that some of the confusion isn't accidental, that someone, perhaps generations of someone's, deliberately cloaked the Holloway tragedies in misinformation. that the conflicting accounts, the missing records, the contradictions between witness statements were orchestrated to obscure a darker reality no one dares articulate. Madness or manipulation, curse or cover-up. The Holloway legacy remains clouded, a riddle entangled in its own mytho-legacy where every answer seems to spawn to more questions. And the line between madness and malevolence has never been more difficult to define. But not all voices were silenced. Hidden among the faded, brittle pages of police files, buried in overlooked court documents, or scribbled in personal journals never meant for public eyes, there remain testimonies, witness accounts dismissed at the time, forgotten or deliberately buried. These are the voices of those who saw too much, who spoke in whispers about the Holloways, long before the rest of the world dared to listen. Their accounts, fragmented but disturbingly consistent, hint at truths far more unsettling than official records ever acknowledged. Among the most compelling are the grainy, decades-old interviews with the elderly residents of Belmorne Parish, men and women now stooped and silver-haired, recalling stories from their youth with eyes clouded by memory, yet voices steady with conviction. They speak of things seen at the Holloway estate long before the tragedies became national headlines, shadowy figures moving behind shattered windows, even when the house had been abandoned for years, strange lights pulsing through the overgrown grounds, flickering in unnatural rhythms beneath the Spanish moss, shapes barely human, glimpsed at the edges of the swamp under the cold glow of moonlight. One such voice comes from Marianne Boudreau, now in her 90s, who spent her youth working on nearby farms. In a taped interview recorded in 2003, she recounted walking home past the Holloway estate as a teenager in the 1940s. She remembers the oppressive silence, the way the fog hung thicker near the property line, and the unmistakable sound of music's soft, distant, like an old phonograph playing a waltz, but warbling, distorted, twisting into something unrecognizable as she approached. There was no one living there then, she recalled, her hands trembling in her lap. But I saw them figures in the upstairs windows, watching. Her story mirrors dozens of others tucked away in forgotten police archives. Anonymous testimonies collected by reluctant deputies over the years, dismissed at the time as superstition or hysteria. Reports of cryptic gatherings near the ruins of the old chapel, hooded figures assembling beneath the cypress trees, chanting that seemed to rise and fall with the tides. Others described finding small altars deep in the woods, arrangements of animal bones, melted wax, symbols etched into the soil, always centered around the same circular patterns documented throughout the Holloway legend. Perhaps most haunting are the accounts from those who claim to have encountered the so-called glowing children, tales of pale childlike figures glimpsed along the Perdition River's edge, their forms faintly luminescent, faces blank and eyes eerily reflective. While skeptics attribute these sightings to swamp gas or the play of light on the water, the consistency of these testimonies spanning decades and coming from witnesses with no apparent connection to one another has kept the legend alive. Detective Charles Renard meticulously catalogued these hidden accounts, regarding them as pieces of a larger puzzle ignored by conventional investigation. He believed these witnesses, their stories, too specific, too aligned across generations, to be pure coincidence. Yet time and again, their voices were overshadowed by more official narratives, accidental deaths, natural disasters, family mental illness. Other testimonies hint at more conspiratorial explanations. Former estate workers spoke of private deliveries made to the manor late at night, crates too large for ordinary goods, escorted by unmarked vehicles. One unnamed source, protected in Renard's files, described an underground network of tunnels beneath the Holloway estate, passageways allegedly used for secret gatherings. Their existence never confirmed by official surveys, but whispered about for decades. Still others came forward in secret, their identities concealed, afraid of ridicule or retribution. They described being warned away from the estate by unknown men in tailored suits, advised to forget what they'd seen, to let the Holloway story fade into myth. One anonymous tipster even claimed that some disappearances were orchestrated, individuals silenced to prevent them from unraveling the Holloway enigma. For every testimony aired, countless others remained sealed in musty file boxes, their warnings unheard by the broader public. Over time, these voices were lost in the noise of misinformation, their unsettling details reduced to mere ghost stories whispered in Belmore's dive bars and passed among families, like cautionary folklore. But for those willing to sift through the fragments, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The hidden witnesses, the overlooked testimonies, paint a picture of something far more orchestrated, far more chilling than simple madness or superstition. They speak of a legacy protected by secrecy, veiled by misinformation, yet never fully silenced. And as the Holloway estate continues to decay beneath the weight of time and tangled moss, their warnings linger in the humid air, reminder that not all who looked into the shadows of the manor were blind to what stared back. The evidence, when stripped of the folklore and fractured memories, remains chilling in its tangibility, a catalogue of details too specific, too deliberate, to dismiss entirely. It is scattered across the history of the Holloway estate like breadcrumbs, leading into a labyrinth of unsettling truths. Symbols etched beneath rotting floorboards, cryptic journals tucked away behind false walls, remnants of ceremonies whose origins predate the plantation itself. Each artifact whispers of something darker pulsing beneath the Holloway name, something meticulously concealed and yet never fully buried. Photographs from investigative archives revealed the carvings first discovered beneath the floorboards of Holloway Manor during renovations in the 1920s, long before the estate's decay sealed it off from the world. Simple repairs exposed intricate symbols scorched into the wooden beams, circular emblems interlaced with jagged, angular runes that no historian or linguist could definitively trace to any known cultural tradition. Over time, these markings appeared in other hidden corners of the estate, behind crumbling wallpaper, beneath hearthstones, even etched faintly along the inside frames of window panes. Some dismissed them as eccentric decorations, but others recognized their sinister repetition. Across generations, more damning still are the journals, unearthed in fragments during the estate's periodic searches. The most infamous among them belonged to Eliza Holloway, the enigmatic matriarch who vanished without explanation in 1890, bound in cracked leather. Her diary, recovered decades later in a sealed compartment beneath the manor's grand staircase, contains entries that swing from mundane domestic concerns to increasingly unhinged reflections on voices in the walls, figures that bloom like shadows in the orchard, and the glow of the drowned ones beneath the surface of the perdition. One passage, written in a trembling, deteriorating hand mere days before her disappearance, reads, "The children sing beneath the floor. I see them in the glass. The circle widens. Magnus lied. It was never meant to stay asleep." Elite. Cryptic writings were dismissed by early investigators as signs of mental collapse, yet they mirror testimonies gathered over a century later. Her references to the circle and the glowing children recur throughout the folklore and eyewitness reports from Belmorne Parish, unsettling in their consistency. Artifacts uncovered during unofficial excavations only compound the mystery. Buried beneath the chapel ruins, beneath layers of collapsed stone and tangled roots, search teams discovered ceremonial remnants, fragments of clay vessels bearing the same etched symbols, animal bones arranged in geometric patterns and charred, remnants of fabric resembling ritual garments. Forensic examination of these items proved inconclusive, their age difficult to determine, yet the style and composition of the symbols matched those found hidden within the manor itself, a visual language that weaves through Holloway history. Like a scar, one of the most disturbing pieces of hidden evidence surfaced in 1987. Alongside Sarah Holloway's body, beneath her, drawn in careful, almost reverent strokes along the chapel's stone floor, investigators documented the same ancient emblem circular, intersected by jagged, chaotic lines that seemed to hum with their own unsettling symmetry. Despite extensive analysis, no academic or occult historian could definitively trace its origins. Some speculated its resemblance to ritual seals found in pre-Christian European texts. Others pointed toward obscure African diasporic symbology woven into Louisiana's cultural tapestry, but none could explain its presence, recurring over generations, hidden in the architecture of a plantation house decaying in the swamp. Renard's personal files hold even more fragments, a tattered music box recovered from the manor's nursery, still playing a distorted lullaby warped by time. Old photographs where faint, ghostly shapes linger at the edges of family portraits. Witness sketches of spectral figures seen along the riverbanks, their outlines disturbingly similar to descriptions recorded nearly a century apart. Each artifact, each hidden detail feels deliberately placed, as if the Holloway estate itself is a puzzle designed to be deciphered by those bold or foolish enough to look. But with each discovery, the picture only darkens. The carvings beneath the floorboards, the journal entries scrawled in desperation, the bones arranged in quiet ceremony beneath the chapel ruins. Together, they form a pattern that suggests something far more orchestrated than random tragedy, a ritualistic thread woven through the Holloway name, pulsing just beneath the surface, waiting. For some, these chilling details are the final proof of the family's descent into madness, a generational psychosis manifesting in symbols and ceremonies they could no longer distinguish from reality. But for others, the evidence points to something far older, far less humaner, legacy inherited, not through bloodlines, but through pacts forged in shadow, ceremonies whispered beneath the bayou's dense fog, and promises sealed by symbols no one alive can fully translate. Whatever the truth, the artifacts remain, decaying, buried, half erased by time but impossible to ignore. They are the Holloway legacy's silent testimony, proof etched into wood, stone, and bone, that something darker always pulsed beneath the Holloway name, and perhaps still does. The Holloway estate has long been littered with symbols etched into floorboards, hidden behind plaster walls, carved into tree trunks along the Perdition River's edge. At first glance, they appear random, the feverish scratches of time and decay. But under closer scrutiny, these markings reveal chilling patterns, complex iconography, eerily similar to those linked to ancient European occult orders. Coincidence, perhaps, or something far more deliberate. Fragments of a ritualistic lineage stretching across generations, hidden beneath the hollow southern grandeur of the Holloway name. The symbols themselves are striking in their consistency. circular emblems intersected by jagged, chaotic lines, spirals that narrow into sharp points, triangles enclosed within concentric rings, all recurring with unnerving precision across Holloway property. Beneath the estate's rotting chapel, etched deep into the stone foundation, search teams uncovered a near-identical design to those carved into magnolia trees near the swamp, and even faintly scrawled within the margins of personal journals kept by the Holloways themselves. What unsettles investigators and historians alike is how closely these cryptic markings resemble the sigils found in the archives of European secret societies, most notably those linked to the esoteric fringe of Freemasonry and obscure offshoots like l'Association du Cercle Rouge, rumoured to have operated in France during the late 18th century. Scholars of the occult have pointed out parallels between the Holloway symbols and ritual seals documented in forbidden grimoires, medieval alchemical texts, and pre-Christian folk traditions that survived through whispered oral histories. Many of these traditions emphasize cycles, life, death, and rebirth bound together by rituals intended to manipulate fate, secure power, or commune with entities beyond human understanding. The Holloway family's ties to these European circles have never been conclusively proven, yet fragments of correspondence recovered from estate archives hint at unsettling connections. Letters penned by Magnus Holloway reference meetings with unnamed brotherhoods in New Orleans and abroad, along with cryptic mentions of the work begun under the circle's watchful eye. Other documents allude to the widening, an event or condition never fully explained, but repeatedly associated with the family's rituals and private gatherings. The rituals themselves, while only partially reconstructed through fragmented evidence, suggest a deliberate, generational practice that goes beyond superstition. Witness testimonies, particularly from former staff and neighboring families, describe faint chanting emanating from the estate at night, flickering lanterns arranged in calculated patterns across the grounds, and gatherings of robed figures along the banks of the Perdition River during lunar events. In one instance, discovered journals from the late 19th century detail offerings left beneath the manor's chapel's mall tokens, bones and candles arranged in a formation echoing the same circular symbols found hidden throughout the property. Perhaps most disturbing are the cryptic messages left behind by Holloway descendants themselves. Eliza Holloway's diary, discovered decades after her disappearance, is filled with references to the widening and the sleepers beneath the floor. Her fragmented entries suggest knowledge of something ancient buried within the estate, an unseen presence bound to the Holloway bloodline through rituals stretching back generations. Later documents, including the personal effects of Sarah Holloway, echo similar themes, paranoid scribblings of symbols seen in dreams, voices calling from beneath the chapel, the belief that the family was marked from birth by forces older than the land itself. Skeptics argue that the similarities between the Holloway symbols and known occult iconography could stem from a mixture of myth-making and inherited folklore, generational hallucination perpetuated by those living under the weight of their family's dark reputation. But others, including independent researchers and occult historians, suggest a more unnerving possibility, that the Holloways were part of an unbroken lineage of ritual practitioners, their estate a carefully constructed sanctuary for rites designed to harness or appease forces beyond conventional understanding. Regardless of interpretation, the symbols endure. They remain etched into the crumbling bones of Holloway Manor, hidden beneath layers of rot and ruin, resurfacing with every new investigation. every trespasser drawn to the estate's decaying allure. They form a language without a Rosetta Stone, a message whispered across generations, incomplete yet persistent. Some believe these markings were warnings, wards of protection, or desperate attempts to contain what the Holloways had awakened. Others suspect they are invitations, fragments of unfinished ceremonies still pulsing beneath the estate, waiting for the final rite to be completed in the end. The Holloway symbols serve as both evidence and enigma-haunting proof that beneath the family's tragic legacy lies a ritualistic thread far older than the Louisiana swamps, far more intricate than simple madness, and far from finished, whether born of coincidence, obsession, or something far darker. The symbols remain etched into wood, stone, and bone, silent witnesses to a lineage that refuses to die. Could the Holloway spiral the generations of tragedy, unexplained deaths, vanishing heirs, and whispers of occult rituals be explained by something as human, as clinical, as generational trauma? Could delusion, mass hysteria, or the corrosive grip of indoctrination account for the unnerving consistency that has plagued the Holloway name for nearly 2 centuries? It is a question that has divided experts for decades, drawing in psychologists, historians, cult deprogrammers, and even neuroscientists, each attempting to untangle the psychological roots of a legacy so dark it borders on myth. Yet even the most grounded voices admit the pattern of Holloway misfortune, the precision of the symbols, the timing of events, it all resists easy explanation. Dr. Elaine Voss, a forensic psychologist with 30 years of experience studying intergenerational trauma and family pathology, has pored over the Holloway files for much of her career. You have to start by looking at context, she explains in a 2014 interview, gesturing toward a sprawling timeline of Holloway incidents pinned across her office wall. This is a wealthy, isolated family, embedded in the deep region where secrecy, superstition, and trauma often coexist. The legacy of slavery, economic power, and strict patriarchal control can create pressure cookers of dysfunction. The Holloways are not unique in that regard. Voss believes what many call the Holloway curse may, in fact, be the culmination of psychological patterns repeating over generations. What she describes as genetic predispositions amplified by environmental triggers. Her research into the family archives suggests high rates of depression, psychosis, and suicidal ideation, often masked under the veil of aristocratic eccentricity. When you trace the reports from Eliza Holloway's journals to the documented disappearances, you see hallmarks of untreated mental illness compounded by isolation, Voss argues, hallucinations, paranoia, ritualistic behavior. These can all emerge in families where boundaries between reality and folklore erode. Supporting this view is a series of neurological studies conducted by independent researchers, using medical records obtained from Holloway descendants in the mid-20th century. Though incomplete, the files reveal patterns of neurological irregularities, lobe abnormalities, which modern science associates with heightened spiritual experiences, auditory hallucinations, and dissociative episodes. One controversial theory posits that these neurological markers, passed down through generations, predisposed the Holloways to interpret ordinary fears through the lens of the supernatural, but others push beyond clinical explanations. Dr. William Cortland, a cult behavior specialist who has studied closed communities across the American South, sees striking parallels between the Holloway spiral and high control group psychology. It's not just Traumite indoctrination, asserts Magnus Holloway's rumored associations with secret societies, the consistent presence of symbols, the ritualistic patterns. This mirrors what we see in generational cult structures. Knowledge is compartmentalized, myth becomes fact, and outsiders are demonized. Over time, members, whether by choice or birth, accept the extraordinary as normal. Cortland's research highlights how isolation and wealth can foster environments ripe for radical belief systems to take hold, often masked behind the respectable facade of legacy and tradition. The Holloway estate, remote and shielded from scrutiny, may have served as both sanctuary and echo chamber, place where rituals, beliefs, and paranoia were passed down, unquestioned, across generations. Brain scans overlaid with images of Holloway family portraits underscore a chilling visuogenetic predispositions, neurological anomalies, and psychological conditioning merging into a singular, self-perpetuating cycle. Yet, as experts dissect these patterns, even they struggle to dismiss the eerie consistencies that resist clinical categorization. The timing of key incidents: the 1874 disappearance of Thomas Holloway, the 1952 vanishing of the three Holloway cousins, Sarah Holloway's death in 1987, all align with lunar cycles and astrological events documented in occult calendars. The recurring symbols found hidden in walls, beneath floorboards, and etched into the surrounding bayou bear uncanny resemblance to sigils used by ancient European esoteric orders, details that skeptics argue require a level of deliberate planning far beyond the random manifestations of delusion. Even Dr. Voss concedes the Holloway legacy flirts with the edges of explanation. "It's the consistency that unsettles me," she admits. "Hallucinations are chaotic by nature, symptoms fluctuate. But here you have generations producing identical symbols, identical language, the widening, the sleepers, the glowing children. These aren't typical manifestations of psychosis." Her unease is echoed by Dr. Cortland, who acknowledges that while cult indoctrination can account for ritualistic behaviors, it rarely maintains such rigid consistency across nearly 2 centuries without external reinforcement. Either the Holloways are the most disciplined generational cult in modern history, Cortland remarks, or there are environmental, perhaps supernatural, factors reinforcing these beliefs. Among the most debated topics is the role of epigenetic trauma, how experiences of extreme stress, ritualistic fear, or unresolved ancestral trauma can literally alter gene expression, imprinting psychological scars onto subsequent generations. In the Holloway case, this theory suggests that the weight of family myth, coupled with real psychological illness, created an inherited loop of dysfunction fueled by both biology and belief. Yet for all the expert analysis, no consensus emerges. Some cling to the psychological framework, a dynasty collapsing under untreated mental illness, hereditary neurological conditions, and the insidious effects of wealth-fueled isolation. Others lean toward cultural explanations, secrecy, and the seductive power of myth in shaping reality. But few dismiss the nagging details, the patterns too precise, the symbols too consistent, the testimonies of witnesses with no stake in the family's fate. The Holloway spiral remains, in the eyes of experts, a case study in the collision between psychology and folklore, living testament to how trauma, belief, and perhaps something darker can intertwine, warping perception and reshaping fate. Whether delusion, indoctrination, or inherited madness explains the Holloway enigma, one truth remains clear: the eerie consistency of their fate defies easy dismissal. and whatever lies beneath the surface of Belmorne Parish refuses to rest. The timeline of the Holloway family is more than a sequence of tragic milestones. It's a meticulously layered record of blood, vanished heirs, and unanswered questions, stretching back to the mid-19th century and threading forward like an unbroken scar across generations. When pieced together, the pattern is undeniable, a series of escalating incidents bound by symbols, ritualistic echoes, and the persistent whisper of something darker festering. Beneath Belmorne Parish, it begins in 1847, just 5 years after Magnus Holloway first laid the foundation stones of Holloway Manor, when local records quietly note the sudden disappearance of 2 indentured workers assigned to the estate's construction. Their names vanish from parish ledgers, never investigated, dismissed as runaway labourers in a region where the powerful made inconvenient people disappear without consequence. But this quiet omission marks the first flicker of the Holloway spiral. By 1874, the pattern begins in earnest with the vanishing of Thomas Holloway, the only son of Magnus and Eliza Holloway. Thomas, then 12, was last seen playing near the Perdition River. Despite exhaustive searches, no body was recovered. Within weeks, carved symbols, the now infamous circular emblems intersected by jagged lines, appeared etched into trees along the river banks, the first documented instance of their presence. The family publicly mourned, but private correspondences hint at something far less ordinary. In one surviving letter, Eliza writes cryptically of the widening and warns Magnus, asterisk, it's begun. The bloodline fractures. Asterisk, following Thomas's disappearance, the Holloway tragedies unfold with unnerving consistency. Between 1875 and 1890, 3 household staff members vanish from the estate under suspicious circumstances. Whispers circulate of occult gatherings near the chapel ruins. The year 1890 brings Elisa Holloway's own disappearance. Her final diary entries, rambling about glowing children, widening circles, and unseen forces beneath the manor floorboards. The timeline then quiets, but not for long. In 1913, Holloway heir Victor Holloway dies under questionable circumstances during a private gathering at the estate. His body is discovered near the old chapel, bearing unexplained burns and surrounded by what investigators later describe as ritualistic debris. His death is ruled an accident, the first of many Holloway tragedies obscured by privilege and influence. The 1952 Bayou incident reignites public fascination and fear. 3 Holloway cousins, Jonathan, Isabel, and Peter Holloway, all between the ages of 8 and 14, vanish overnight during a family gathering at the estate. Search parties recover no remains, only remnants of ritual altars, found deep within the swamp. Locals whisper of figures seen drifting near the river's edge, faint chanting beneath the cypress canopy. The incident cements the legend of the Holloway curse in the public imagination, and, for many, it marks the point where skepticism erodes into dread. The 1970s bring sporadic reports of strange symbols reappearing on the Holloway grounds. Sightings of pale figures at the estate perimeter, and eerie lights flickering along the riverbanks. These occurrences culminate in 1987, with the most chilling and well-documented incident in the family's history, the death of Sarah Holloway. Sarah, known for her obsession with unraveling her family's dark legacy, is found posed ritualistically beneath the crumbling chapel ruins. Her body, positioned at the center of a symbol traced in ash and bone, matches the carvings first documented in the 1870s. the same symbols recurring throughout generations. Her death is ruled inconclusive. Official reports cite mental illness, but the consistency of details, the placement, the markings, the timing aligned with a lunar event, echo the sinister pattern etched into the Holloway timeline. Detective Charles Renard, assembling the fragmented records into a singular, chilling sequence, identifies the hidden structure beneath the chaos incidents striking at intervals, clustered around specific astrological alignments, each accompanied by symbols and sightings that defy coincidence. His reconstructed timeline overlays incident sites on a parish map, revealing an unsettling geographic symmetry, disappearances and deaths radiating outward from Holloway Manor in near-perfect concentric circles, as though each tragedy was part of an orchestrated ritual spreading across Belmore's decaying landscape. From 1847 to 1987, a clear, grotesque pattern emerges, a lineage soaked in tragedy, bound by symbols, vanishing heirs, and unanswered questions. The timeline is more than historical curiosity. It's a blueprint of something festering beneath the Holloway legacy, pulsing through generations, resistant to reason or resolution. And with every incident meticulously plotted across the decades, the spiral only deepens, suggesting that, for the Holloways, and perhaps for Belmore itself, the final chapter remains unwritten today. The once grand Holloway Manor stands as little more than a skeleton devoured by time. Its walls sag inward, choked by vines, and draped in veils of Spanish moss. Shattered windows gape like hollow eyes across the marsh, and the chapel, long collapsed in on itself, sinks deeper into the swampy earth with every passing year. The Holloway bloodline, once synonymous with wealth and power in Belmore Parish, is fractured beyond recognition. Some descendants changed their names, fleeing the weight of the legacy. Others vanished entirely, their fates unknown. A few remain quiet, distant relatives who refuse interviews, their silence a final barrier between themselves and the family's poisoned roots. But though the bloodline fades, the shadows remain, and in Belmore the questions persist. Stubborn as the fog that curls off the Perdition River, locals still whisper about the glowing children seen near the old estate grounds, figures pale and flickering at the water's edge, vanishing when approached. Campfire stories about the Holloway curse thrive among teenagers, daring one another to trespass onto the rotting property after dark. Some speak of hearing faint music drifting from the manor ruins, a warped lullaby no one has played in decades. Others claim to have found new symbols carved into trees along the estate perimeter, matching those etched in hidden corners of the manor long ago. Officially, the Holloway story is over. The police files are sealed, the property condemned. Sarah Holloway's death in 1987 was the final entry in a public record littered with tragedy, unanswered investigations, and administrative dead ends. But for many in Belmore, closure remains elusive. Interviews with remaining residents reveal the deep scars left behind. Elderly locals recount stories of their parents and grandparents working the Holloway estates, some recalling strange rituals, others remembering family members who disappeared after becoming too curious. Younger generations, skeptical yet uneasy, share their own encounters and explained lights, distorted voices in the marsh, and the unsettling feeling that the land itself hums with something restless, unfinished. Abandoned family graves, overgrown, and leaning beneath twisted oaks, offer no clarity. Time and the Louisiana elements have eroded names and dates, leaving behind only cracked stone and weathered angels with missing faces. Some headstones bear symbols nearly identical to those found carved into the manor itself, their meanings lost but their presence persistent. Detective Charles Renard, retired yet still obsessed, continues piecing together the Holloway puzzle. From his cluttered home office, maps, timelines, and photographs cover his walls. Despite decades of research, his questions have only multiplied. Too many patterns, too much erased, he mutters during a rare interview, his eyes heavy with fatigue. You dig deep enough, you see it, the same marks, same disappearances, same ceremonies disguised as coincidence. It doesn't die with them, it festers. What exactly the Holloways unleashed or believed they had unleashed remains a source of speculation. Some experts, rooted in science, insist the tragedies stem from psychological decline, generational trauma, and the corrosive isolation of wealth and secrecy. Others argue the evidence, the symbols, the rituals, the chilling consistency to something older, buried beneath folklore and faded documents. A ritualistic lineage stretching beyond the Holloway name, woven into the land itself. And then there are those unwilling to speak at all, the locals who avoid the estate's roads after sunset, the families with ties to the Holloways who refuse interviews, the remaining parish officials who quietly deflect inquiries with bureaucratic stonewalling. Their silence speaks volumes. The Holloway manor rots, swallowed by vines and history, but in Belmorne Parish, shadows still stir beneath the cypress trees, and questions hang heavier than the humid air. The widening, the glowing children, the carved symbols that reappear when no one is watching. The puzzle remains incomplete. Generations gone, but the echoes persist, whispering through the marshlands, waiting for anyone to dare piece together what the Holloways tried to bury, and what refused to stay buried. We return, as so many have before, to the theories, the tangled web of explanations that attempt and fail to make sense of the Holloway legacy. For over 170 years, investigators, historians, skeptics, and believers have dissected the same fragments. The vanishing heirs, the ritual symbols carved into ancient wood, the chilling diary entries, the witnesses whispering of glowing children along the Perdition River. And yet, for all the scrutiny, the truth remains elusive. The Holloway spiral resists resolution, dangling possibilities like frayed threads, one unraveling deeper into madness, ritual or something wholly inhuman clawing at the edges of reality. Theory 1. Madness and generational trauma. The most conventional explanation remains grounded in psychology. Experts like Dr. Elaine Voss point to the mounting evidence of hereditary mental illness within the Holloway bloodline: depression, psychosis, paranoia. The symptoms appear, generation after generation, a cruel inheritance passed from Magnus Holloway's descendants to those who still carry the tainted name. Eliza Holloway's descent into delusion, Sarah Holloway's obsession with family mythology, the reclusive, erratic behavior documented among Holloway heirs, all are hallmarks of untreated generational trauma, compounded by isolation and the suffocating expectations of legacy. Supporters of this theory argue the symbols littering the estate's dinter walls, hidden beneath floorboards, are not evidence of ritual, but manifestations of shared psychosis. The human mind, under enough stress, fabricates meaning from chaos. The Holloways, trapped within their own decaying empire, projected inherited fears onto the architecture itself, transforming ancestral dysfunction into mythic horror. The glowing children, the whispers of voices in the walls, the reports of Ritual gatherings, skeptics attribute these to mass hysteria. The swamp's atmospheric illusions, or decades of folklore amplifying ordinary events into supernatural encounters. As Dr. Voss summarizes, the Holloway curse is a self-fulfilling prophecy. The expectation of madness creates madness. The estate became a crucible for delusion, and yet the symbols are real. The disappearances are documented. The timing of incidents aligned with lunar cycles and historical patterns feels disturbingly precise. Madness explains much, but never everything. Theory 2, ritual and occult lineage. Then there is the theory that refuses to die the belief that the Holloways were not merely victims of mental collapse, but active participants in something ritualistic, secretive, and calculated. Magnus Holloway's rumored ties to European occult societies, particularly clandestine offshoots of Freemasonry and La Société du Cercle Rouge, form the backbone of this perspective. Recovered correspondences between Magnus and unnamed European contacts hint at work continued under the Circle's gaze and a widening begun in the bloodline. The symbols found throughout the estate bear undeniable resemblance to those documented in esoteric grimoires, pre-Christian ritual texts, and alchemical seals designed to manipulate fate or commune with entities beyond human comprehension. The consistency of these symbols, appearing unchanged for over a century, etched into chapel stones, carved into the roots of cypress trees, hidden beneath hearthstones, suggests deliberate preservation, not spontaneous delusion. Coupled with the timing of family tragedies, aligned with solar eclipses, equinoxes, and significant occult dates, the pattern resembles less a descent into madness and more a carefully maintained tradition. Proponents of this theory argue that the Holloway heirs, willingly or not, inherited a generational Pacton ancestral obligation to continue rituals begun by Magnus and his elusive brotherhood. The disappearances, the deaths, the glowing children, they are not accidents, but sacrifices, symptoms of ceremonies older than Louisiana itself. Cult behavior specialist Dr. William Cortland supports this theory, noting the parallels between Holloway patterns and high control, generational cult structures, the isolation of the estate, the secrecy, the fixation on symbols. It all mirrors behaviors seen in known ritual groups who operate in society's shadows. If the Holloways weren't part of a cult, Cortland states, they manufactured their own, generation after generation. But what of the third possibility, the most unsettling, the one even skeptics hesitate to entertain? Theory 3, the inhuman unknown scattered among the folklore, hidden testimonies, and decaying archives, is a theory more chilling than madness or ritual. A possibility that what haunts the Holloway legacy is neither psychological nor man-made, but something wholly other, something inhuman, predating the Holloways, festering beneath Belmorne's swamps long before Magnus laid the first stone of his empire. Witness reports of pale, luminescent children near the Perdition River, voices calling from beneath floorboards, figures blooming in mirrors, all bear the hallmarks of folkloric encounters with entities beyond human understanding. Some researchers draw connections to indigenous legends of less revenants, spectral beings said to haunt Louisiana's waterways, or European tales of fly-like spirits abducting children into other realms. The Holloway symbols, in this view, are neither protective nor malevolent, but communicative fragments of a language or contract binding the family to forces slumbering beneath the estate. The widening, referenced in Eliza Holloway's diary and echoed across generations, suggests a boundary stretched thin, a veil between realities breached through ceremony, obsession, or accident. Sarah Holloway's death in 1987, surrounded by symbols drawn in ash and bone, may represent the final stage of this breacher portal widened beyond control. An invitation answered by something no ritual could contain. Skeptics scoff at this notion, grounding their conclusions in psychology and sociology. But even among hardened investigators, a quiet unease lingers. Detective Renard, after decades spent dissecting evidence, remains uncertain. "It doesn't add up," he admitted in his final recorded interview. "Patterns this precise don't emerge from coincidence alone. Whether it's madness, ritual, or something else, it's unfinished. The spiral's still turning. Theories collide, truth remains elusive." Decades later, the Holloway puzzle defies resolution. Theories overlap, contradict, and collapse under scrutiny, each offering fragments of truth, but never the whole. Madness explains the hallucinations, but not the symbols etched with mathematical precision. Ritual offers structure, but falters in the face of inexplicable phenomena witnessed by outsiders. The inhuman unknown feels sensational, yet eerily consistent with the oldest testimonies. The estate rots, the bloodline scatters, but the questions remain circling like fog over the Perdition River, etched into tree trunks, whispered through Belmore's decaying streets. Madness, ritual, or something clawing at the edges of reality, unseen yet insistent. We return to the beginning, to the fragments, to the chilling pattern unfolding across generations. And decades later, one truth endures. The Holloway legacy refuses to die, and the spiral isn't finished. The Holloways aren't alone. Across the world, similar tales unravel like spectral echoes, families plagued by enigmatic shadows, ancestral homes rotting beneath the weight of forgotten rituals and secrets concealed beneath generations of silence. The Holloway spiral may be Louisiana's most infamous, but a map of global history reveals unsettling parallels, tragedies, and mysteries that stretch beyond borders, suggesting a darker, universal pattern woven into the fabric of legacy itself. Take, for instance, Boleskine House, nestled on the misty banks of Scotland's Loch Ness. To the untrained eye, it's merely an old manor, weathered by time and storm. But its walls hold stories eerily familiar to those who've studied the Holloway. Built in the 18th century, Boleskine gained notoriety as the residence of occultist Aleister Crowley, whose rituals within its chambers allegedly unleashed forces beyond human control. Fires, deaths, and generations of owners succumbing to madness followed. Even after Crowley's departure, the manor seemed cursed, plagued by unexplained tragedies and whispers of figures seen roaming the grounds. Locals, like those in Belmore, speak of shapes at the windows, glowing lights at night, and a legacy steeped in ritualistic secrecy across the Atlantic. In the quiet Iowa town of Villisca, another grim parallel unfolds. The infamous Villisca axe murders of 1912, an entire family and 2 young guests slaughtered in their sleep. Though not rooted in generational decline like the Holloways, the aftermath echoes eerily, a home abandoned yet preserved, visited by those seeking to understand the lingering darkness and countless reports of spectral figures disembodied, voices and inexplicable symbols etched into walls long after the crime faded from headlines. Further still, the case of the Borley Rectory in Essex, England, known as the most haunted house in Britain, mirrors the Holloway spiral in chilling, detail. Built in the 19th century, Borley became infamous for generations of unexplained noises, apparitions, and the repeated reappearance of cryptic symbols carved into its structure, messages no one could translate. Like Holloway Manor, Borley attracted investigators, skeptics, and believers alike, all drawn to the site's inescapable air of unfinished tragedy beyond individual properties. Entire families bear the scars of legacy-driven collapse. The Habsburgs of Europe, their dynasty stretching across centuries, carried whispers of a family curse as their lineage buckled under mysterious deaths, suicides, and political ruin. Though rooted in history rather than folklore, the pattern of generational downfall feels disturbingly similar. A bloodline unraveling beneath the unseen weight of its own legacy. Closer to Belmorn, deep in the Appalachian Mountains, small, isolated families recount stories passed down like warnings, tales of the watchers in the trees, bloodlines marked by rituals lost to time, and ancestral homes where tragedy is a certainty, not a possibility. Anthropologists studying these regions have documented a familiar cycle: inherited trauma, ritualistic behaviors, unexplained disappearances, and symbols reappearing across generations, carved into wood and stone as though echoing forgotten pacts. Even the infamous Winchester Mystery House in California, constructed by Sarah Winchester in the late 1800s, fits the broader pattern. Driven by a belief in spirits and generational retribution, Sarah transformed her home into a labyrinth of staircases, leading nowhere, hidden rooms, and architectural anomalies designed to confuse restless entities. Though her motivations differed from the Holloways, the outcome, an estate steeped in tragedy, folklore, and inexplicable design choices, reflects the same desperate attempt to outwit an inescapable legacy. The global map pinpoints these incidents not as isolated curiosities, but as fragments of a broader, unsettling phenomenon. Families, estates, and bloodlines decaying beneath ritual, secrecy, and shadow. Whether born of psychological breakdown, inherited trauma, or something older, something clawing at the edges of understanding, the pattern persists. For the Holloways, these parallels offer neither comfort nor clarity. They serve only as grim confirmation that the spiral of legacy, tragedy, and the unknown is not confined to Belmorn Parish. It stretches across continents, generations, and belief systems, a testament to humanity's oldest, most haunting fear, that the past never stays buried, and what we inherit cannot always be outrun. As the Holloway Manor rots beneath Louisiana's moss-draped trees, the same shadows stretch quietly across the globe, lingering in forgotten estates, crumbling family names, and ritual scars carved beneath floorboards. The Holloways are but one thread in a far larger, darker tapestry, the legacy of secrets that refuses to fade, their legacy wealth, power, and terror. For nearly 2 centuries, the Holloway name commanded respect and fear in equal measure, woven into the blood-soaked soil of Belmorn. Parish like the gnarled roots of the cypress trees that crowd the Perdition River. They were aristocrats, visionaries, and, some would argue, victims of their own cursed ambition. But long after the final lights dimmed in Holloway Manor and the last heirs vanished into obscurity, their tale festers unfinished, unanswered, waiting for the next chapter. Today, Holloway Manor is little more than a decaying carcass swallowed by vines and fog, its grand facade eroded by decades of neglect and whispered fear. The estate's skeletal frame looms over the swamps, windows gaping like hollow eyes, its once manicured grounds overrun with wild growth. But beneath the ruin, the questions remain, the symbols carved into forgotten stones, the whispers that drift through the trees after dark, the lingering sense that something was never laid to rest. In Belmorn, nothing stays buried forever. The townsfolk know this, even if they rarely speak of it aloud. Some still avoid the old Holloway grounds entirely, steering clear of the manor and its decaying chapel as though proximity alone could stir the shadows awake. Others come in search of answers, paranormal investigators, historians, the morbidly curious, all drawn to the spiral of tragedy like moths to flame. Yet none leave satisfied. For every theory proposed, for every piece of hidden evidence uncovered, the Holloway puzzle resists completion. The legacy, like the fog rolling in from the bayou, only thickens. Was it madness passed down like an heirloom? Generational trauma left to rot beneath grand chandeliers and decaying oak? Or something older, darker, a force clawing at the edges of reason, creeping into the lives of those bound by blood to the Holloway name? Even now, decades after Sarah Holloway's ritualistic death beneath the crumbling chapel, no one truly knows, and perhaps that is the final curse, the weight of unanswered questions, of symbols etched into wood and bone, of shadows stretching just beyond the light. The Holloways may fade from public memory, their portraits cracked and forgotten, their descendants scattered or silenced. But their tale, the vanishing heirs, the glowing children, the rituals whispered through moss trees festers beneath the surface, waiting. The manor rots, the family line fractures, but the spiral continues. As the fog tightens its grip on Belmorn Parish, as the Perdition River coils silently through the swamps, the question lingers, heavy and unresolved. When will the next chapter begin? And when it does, who will be left to tell it? Because here, in Belmorn, nothing stays buried forever.